So if you're anywhere near this number right now, don't treat it as a reward you've earned to finally relax. Treat it as the moment your job quietly changes from building the number to guarding it. Run the actual math on your own accounts before anyone with a smile and a business card gets the chance to run it for you. Because the gap between the two versions of your future isn't determined by luck. It's determined by a handful of boring decisions repeated quietly for years. If this gave you a clearer picture of what's actually happening with your own money, that's exactly what this channel is for. Subscribe to Chris Wealth and turn on notifications so the next number that matters doesn't catch you unprepared. We break down the real math behind the money decisions people face every single day. No hype, no sales pitch, just the numbers as they actually are. Because in the end, the money you protect will always outlast the money you chase. And seventh, automate everything you possibly can. Elena never actually decides whether to invest each month. The transfer just happens automatically the day her paycheck lands. Removing the decision removes the emotion, and emotion is where most financial damage actually begins. Here is the real twist buried underneath everything in this video. $750,000 is not a finish line, and it's not a trophy. It's a fork in the road that looks exactly the same no matter which direction you're about to take. Ray and Elena crossed the identical number in the identical year. A decade later, Elena's money has grown into something close to $1.5 million, quietly, without drama, while she went on living her ordinary life. Ray, meanwhile, has a beautiful truck, a renovated kitchen, and a portfolio that's barely bigger than the day he started, because every upgrade he made felt small in the moment, and none of them ever felt like the mistake that was slowly adding up. That's the part almost no one warns you about. Wealth at this level is rarely destroyed by one dramatic decision. It's worn away by 1,000 small, comfortable, perfectly reasonable ones, each so minor you'd never notice it happening, until you look up 10 years later and wonder where it all went. The people who keep their $750,000 and grow it into real, lasting freedom aren't smarter than the people who lose it. They're not luckier either. They simply refuse to let a bigger number quietly rewrite their daily habits. They protect what they've built, they diversify the risk, they get the fees and taxes under control, and then they get out of their own way and let time do what time does best. First, freeze your lifestyle before you do anything else. Not because you don't deserve nice things, but because every dollar you redirect into new fixed expenses right now is a dollar quietly stolen from compounding, an extra $1,500 a month in new spending. Invested instead becomes well over $200,000 in a decade. The nicer lifestyle doesn't cost you $1,500 a month. It costs you the $200,000 it would have become. Second, add up every fee you're currently paying in real dollars, not percentages. Percentages hide how large the number actually is. Ask any advisor managing your money. One direct question: what is my total cost in dollars every year? If they can't answer that plainly, that hesitation is your answer. Third, build a genuine cash cushion, not an oversized one and not a non-existent one. Enough to cover several months of expenses. Ideally more if retirement is close, so a downturn never forces you to sell at the worst possible time. Cash isn't a growth strategy. It's the insurance policy that lets your growth strategy survive a bad year. Fourth, look honestly at how concentrated your wealth really is. If a large chunk sits in a single company's stock, especially the one that also pays your salary, that isn't loyalty, it's a hidden risk wearing a familiar face. Spread it out, pay the tax if you have to, and stop tying your entire future to a single earnings call. Fifth, split your money across different tax types on purpose: Roth, traditional, and taxable, so that later you have the flexibility to control your own tax bill instead of the tax code controlling it for you. Sixth, protect the downside before you celebrate the upside. A basic umbrella policy, an updated will, and correct beneficiaries take one afternoon and cost almost nothing compared to the years of work they protect. The eighth trap is the one almost nobody wants to think about. What happens if something goes wrong? Ray carries only the state minimum auto insurance he picked out in his 20s, has no umbrella liability policy, and has no updated will or beneficiaries on any account. One serious accident, one lawsuit, one bad afternoon on the road, and 15 years of careful saving could be gone in a single judgment. An umbrella policy covering an extra $1 million in liability typically costs a few $100s a year. arguably the cheapest real protection available anywhere in personal finance. Elena bought hers the year she crossed six figures, long before she ever felt rich enough to need it. She also has a simple, updated will and current beneficiaries on every account. So if something happened to her tomorrow, her money would reach her family in weeks, instead of being frozen in probate for a year or more. Now here's the psychological trap underneath all of the others, the one that quietly decides which path you end up on. Once the number gets large, your brain starts treating it as your identity instead of a line on a statement. Ray checks his accounts multiple times a day now, and every red number on the screen sends a small jolt through his chest. That habit, more than any single bad investment, is what eventually pushes people into panic selling during a downturn, locking in losses that patience would have completely avoided. Elena checks her accounts once a month, on purpose, and closes the app immediately after. The market doesn't punish patience. It rewards it relentlessly, decade after decade. Your own anxiety, not the market itself, is often the single most expensive thing you own. So here's the part of this video that actually matters more than any story. What should you do right now the moment your own number crosses this line? The fourth trap is timing, and it's the one almost no calculator ever accounts for. Sequence of returns risk. Picture two people, both retiring with the exact same amount of money, both withdrawing the exact same percentage every year, both earning the exact same average return over 20 years. The only difference is which years the bad markets hit. The person who gets hit with a downturn early in retirement, while still withdrawing money to live on, can end up hundreds of thousands of dollars worse off than the person whose bad years happened to land later. Selling investments during a downturn to cover living expenses locks in losses that a later recovery can never fully undo. If you're within 5 or 10 years of retirement, staying 100% aggressive by default isn't brave. It's a coin flip you don't need to take. A cash cushion covering 1 to 2 years of expenses isn't wasted money sitting idle. It's insurance against being forced to sell at the worst possible moment. The fifth trap is concentration, and Ray is standing directly inside it without realizing. Nearly 25% of his entire net worth is tied up in the stock of the same company that pays his salary. If that company has a bad year, Ray doesn't just watch his portfolio shrink. He risks his paycheck and his savings taking the hit at the exact same time. That isn't two separate risks. It's the same risk counted twice. History is full of loyal, hard-working employees who watched decades of savings evaporate because they never diversified away from the one company they trusted completely. Elena owns pieces of hundreds of companies through simple index funds. If any single business collapses tomorrow, she barely feels it. The fix for Ray is unglamorous. Sell some shares, pay the tax, spread the risk, sleep better. Waiting to avoid a tax bill is exactly how people end up losing the whole position overnight instead. Here's the rule that never breaks. The word guaranteed and a double-digit return cannot honestly exist in the same sentence. Every extra point of promised return is hiding an extra point of risk somebody isn't showing you yet. The people who blow up their $750,000, $50,000 rarely do it slowly through bad luck in the market. They do it in one dramatic swing, chasing a yield that never should have made sense in the first place. At this stage of your financial life, the job isn't to get exciting returns. It's to not lose what took you decades to build. The plain, boring index fund Ray already owned had quietly outperformed nearly every exclusive opportunity he was ever pitched. The third trap hides in plain sight. Fees nobody bothers to add up. Ray's old 401k, the one he hasn't touched in 10 years, sits with an advisor charging 1.4% a year to manage money that hasn't been rebalanced since he opened it. On $280,000, that's nearly $4,000 a year, paid whether the market goes up or crashes. Over 20 years, that single fee alone quietly consumes more than $100,000 of his money. Fees don't announce themselves with a dramatic drop on the statement. They just sit there, year after year, taking their cut in absolute silence. Elena, by contrast, spent one Sunday afternoon reading every fee on every account she owned, moved everything into funds charging a few hundredths of a percent, and saved herself roughly the same amount Ray is quietly losing every single year for the rest of her life. But run the actual math. $890 a month is roughly $10,700 a year, invested instead at a conservative 7% average return. That same money would grow into more than $90,000 over the life of the loan. Ray didn't buy a truck for $62,000. He quietly sold $90,000 of his future self to buy it. And here's the part that makes lifestyle creep so dangerous. It never announces itself. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to sabotage their retirement. They just decide, one perfectly reasonable purchase at a time, that they've earned a slightly nicer life. 18 months later, Ray had also renovated the kitchen, upgraded the family vacations, and added 2 subscription services he barely uses. None of it felt reckless. All of it together quietly cost him a comfortable retirement. Elena did the opposite, and it wasn't dramatic. She simply kept her spending flat while her income slowly rose over the years. The gap between what she earned and what she spent became her fortune. She wasn't living small. She was living exactly the same, on purpose, while her invested money did the heavy lifting. That one boring habit, more than any single investment choice, is why her $750,000 is on pace to become well over $1 million within a handful of years, without her adding another dollar to it. The second trap is what happens when the number gets big enough that ordinary returns start to feel disappointing. 7% on $750,000 is over $50,000 a year. But on a screen, it doesn't feel thrilling. So Ray started getting calls. A financial advisor at a dinner party mentioned a private real estate fund paying a guaranteed 14%. Guaranteed 14%. Ray almost moved a third of his portfolio into it before a friend talked him out of it. To understand how that plays out in real life, let's follow 2 people who hit the identical number in the identical year, and then watch how differently their next decade unfolds. The first is Ray. He's 51, an operations manager who's worked at the same mid-sized company for 18 years. Ray's $750,000 looks impressive from the outside. $280,000 of it is home equity. Another $190,000 sits in company stock he's accumulated through years of employee purchase plans. The rest, roughly $280,000, is split awkwardly across an old 401k he hasn't touched in a decade, a checking account with more cash than it should hold, and a whole life insurance policy a friend sold him at a barbecue 11 years ago. The second is Elena. She's 49, a hospital administrator earning a fairly ordinary salary. Elena also just crossed $750,000, but her number is built completely differently. $150,000 is home equity in a house she deliberately kept modest. $500,000 sits in low-cost index funds spread across a Roth IRA, a traditional 401k, and a taxable brokerage account. The remaining $100,000 is sitting in a high-yield account, exactly 6 months of her expenses, no more, no less. Same headline number, completely different foundations. And that difference is about to become the whole story. Here's the first trap, and it's the quiet one almost nobody sees coming. Lifestyle inflation disguised as a reward. The moment Ray crossed 750, something shifted in his head. He'd spent 30 years being careful, and suddenly a voice told him he'd earned the right to stop being careful. 6 weeks later, he traded in his 9-year-old truck for a brand new one. $62,000, financed over 6 years at $890 a month. It felt harmless. It felt, honestly, earned. Meet Peter. He's 53 years old, sitting in his car in a grocery store parking lot, refreshing his brokerage app for the 3rd time this week. The number on the screen just crossed $750,000. He doesn't smile. He just stares at it, because somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice is asking a question nobody ever prepared him for. Now what? Here's the truth nobody puts in the headline. $750,000 is not a victory lap. It's a pressure test. It's the exact point where the size of your money starts to matter more than the size of your paycheck. Below this number, your job protects you. Above it, your decisions do. And most people never notice the switch flipped until years after they need it to. At this level, a single bad afternoon in the market can erase more money than most people earn in 6 months of work. That's not a scare tactic. That's arithmetic. A 10% pullback on $750,000 is $75,000, gone in days, not years. You cannot out-earn that kind of swing anymore. Your salary used to be bigger than your mistakes. Now your mistakes are bigger than your salary. That single shift is the entire subject of this video. So let's talk about where $750,000 actually places you, because the answer surprises almost everyone. It sounds enormous. It sounds like made it, money, but depending on your age and household, it typically sits somewhere in the upper middle range of American net worth, comfortably ahead of most families, yet nowhere close to what people picture when they hear the word wealthy. You've climbed past the crowd. You have not climbed out of danger. In fact, financial planners sometimes call this exact stretch the fragile middle, too much money to be ignored by salesmen. Not quite enough to survive a serious, unforced error without real pain,